As coaches, we are constantly striving for more, to be better. We read the books, we listen to the podcast, but who do we turn to for real-time personalized help? You need a support system. That's why we're introducing the Coach Gym, an online community for continuous coaching development. You get access to all our courses, hundreds of practical resources, and you get to connect with a global network of aligned coaches. Also, you get direct support from myself, Nate Sanderson, and other leaders through regular office hours and webinars. Learning isn't an event, it's a journey. Join us. Find your community and elevate your coaching. Visit tocculture.com now. That's tocculture.com. So one of my favorite authors, researchers is Dr. Daniel Siegel. He wrote books like The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline. And he has just great research on parenting and a great way of communicating it. And one of my favorite lines he says is, it's not won't, it's can't, when we're talking about the brain. I love that. Like, it's not won't, it's can't. It's a line that I try to remember as a parent when it's 9 p.m. at night and my kids are just exhausted from a long day and they're not listening. They're melting down when they're told it's time for bed. And it's, it's not that they won't, it's that they can't, right? Their brain lacks that capacity in that moment when they're exhausted. And I think it's really important for us to remember that when we're coaching 8-year-olds, even 18-year-olds, heck, even 28-year-olds. Like, the brain takes time to develop. And just like we wouldn't expect an 8-year-old to perform some really advanced skill like shooting a three-pointer, well, we shouldn't be expecting an athlete to be able to handle something emotionally that their brain hasn't developed the capacity to actually handle. Now, the beautiful part of coaching is just like parenting, is that it provides lots of opportunities for us to work with, to help people, work with athletes, to help them develop their capacity to regulate their emotions. In the next 2 episodes of the podcast, we're excited to be interviewing David Durand, who's a certified mental performance consultant through the Association of Applied Sport Psychology, AASP, and has a background and training in clinical psychology as well as athlete development. He works with athletes, coaches, and organizations to bring psychological knowledge and tools to improve the functioning, development, and performance. His website, realdevelopment.org, is where you can learn more about him, as well as he recently released the book Bet, like B-E-T, Bet on It, a psychological approach to coaching Gen Z and beyond. Now, if you find coaching Gen Z to be, that they're too soft or they're too emotional, well, today's conversations, I think, is going to be really enlightening for you. And it's also going to be empowering because it's going to help give you some insights and tools to more effectively coach Gen Z. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Betsy Butterick. The mission of this podcast is to help you to become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this and every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. It's the TOC weekly newsletter. There's a link in the details of this episode, or you can also do so at tocculture.com. Also, check out Betsy's blog on Substack at Betsy Butterick. David, this is an exciting conversation to have today. You've released your book, Bet on It, which we're going to unpack a little bit today. I think one of the cool things that I'm actually excited about is that I think we've talked a lot about Gen Z on this podcast, how to coach Gen Z, how to work with Gen Z, and you're part of Gen Z, right? And I think that, and also a lot of the listeners on this podcast, I know, are Gen Z. So that's an interesting thing about yourself. But why don't you just start by actually just kind of giving our listeners a rundown of how you went from basketball coaching, coaching the skills, performance, and then moving into this thing where you're really focused on supporting, Gen Z athletes from a psychological approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, I was obsessed with basketball, at a very young age, and I always loved the aspect that you by yourself can work on so many different aspects of the game. It's a very unique sport in that you can just, you can develop so many skills without even having the other 9 people right around you on the court, just by yourself. And so for me, I always loved that. I was the, 9, 10-year-old that was helping the, 6, 7-year-old down the street in the neighborhood just learn skills and get a little better, and would always love kind of coaching and training. And so after college, when I kind of stepped away from sports, had some space from it all, I started getting into player development and training. So, from 6 year olds to 26 year olds, kind of around the New Orleans, Louisiana area, and just doing player development each week and doing that and skill development. And it was great. And as I was doing that, I was in a doctoral program for clinical psychology, actually. So on the path to become a clinical psychologist, and a couple years into it, my best hours of the week were the hours I was training kids on the court, and athletes and working with them. And I was starting to see the connections. Like, okay, you have clinical psychology, and then I'm working with these athletes in the basketball world, but they're actually kind of the same thing, and they're very connected and integrated of like how the mind works. And if a player is stressed from something going on in family life or something going on with their sports team or scrolling social media right before, like all of that impacts how they're thinking, how they're feeling, and what they're doing, which is the psychology, the science of how we think, feel, and behave. And so that's really what I started to see, those connections, and be like, man, this is what I want to do. I want to bring kind of the psychological world into the sports world, and not just like kind of the sports psych, but in a way that really understands athletes and helps them develop psychological strength so that their potential is a little bit closer and they have opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise. And so for me, that was really, the hook was seeing, okay, these aren't two
Mhm.
different experiences. This is really just kind of the same thing, and they're very integrated. So that's when I shifted and stepped out of the clinical psych program and pursued more sports psych and just kind of coaching and consulting and working with players and teams and coaches.
I kind of I love that actually. It's kind of like you recognized, bringing student athletes or students or young people into an office and then put them in a chair and, doing that work with them
Right.
would wasn't very appealing to you, and probably not as appealing to them as,
Yeah.
hey, let's do this on the court, let's do this on the field, let's do this in a sporting environment. When you think about this going really well in your experience, because you've already been on the journey, you've been doing this work, when it's gone really well with athletes, what's the impact? Like, what does success look like by taking this psychological approach?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the awareness for the athletes, because that awareness can be so empowering. So even asking questions that are different, because people are so used to coaching that is just trying to get players to do what the coaches want them to do, or coaching that's the players, there's some idea, but the players haven't really bought into it, or it doesn't really come from them. And so even questions of like, hey man, like what do you want today? Or like what are you looking to get better at? Or, they say they make a mistake. Hey, I love that action that you took on that right side. Like that rip through is a great move. What did you see right before that pass? Like what kind of caught your eye, or what were you thinking? Just getting into their experience, I feel like is so big, especially when we're talking about Gen Z, and honestly, I think just humans in general, of where are you at? What are you thinking? Kind of what are you feeling right now? Because all of that is going to play into the decisions you're making, right? The actions you're taking, and how you're impacting the environment, the atmosphere, the people around you. And so awareness is huge, just helping them become more aware, but also aware that you care. You care enough to ask and leave your perspective, your vantage point, to enter into kind of their world a little bit. That's what honestly I find the most success with. And that's always step one for me, is trying to get into where they are at, because a lot of times they don't know. And I think this is really practical, just to rant on or banter on this just for another minute, of like, we talk about IQ a lot as coaches, basketball IQ, right? Whatever sport, volleyball IQ. We want to develop players' IQ, but I think a lot of that, isn't us telling them what to do or what to think about, but understanding how they're thinking already and then working within that space to kind of expand it. And so I always just try and enter kind of first, because that awareness lets them know that I care and I'm willing to enter their world. And then it also lets them become more aware of how they're processing things, and they can start
Mhm.
to kind of build that IQ skill set in whatever sport they're in.
Yeah. I think I probably must have been 1,000 times that a player would make a mistake and I go, "What were you thinking?" But I wasn't
Sure.
really asking a question.
Asking.
I was just, venting my frustrations. But you're talking about asking questions that drive awareness. I love this bit about getting into their experience. I kind of see it as like getting into their experience, helping them to get into their experience, and then
Yes.
you to probably as a coach get out of your own head of like the stories that you're the narratives you create. Because I think a lot of times around Gen Z, it's like, well, these kids these days, and then we have this narrative, this story around this player or these players or these athletes
Yeah.
that, really don't serve us. And they're just, a lot of judgment. So I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, the assumptions there I think are huge because Deb Dana, she's a big kind of polyvagal, therapy, um, in the therapy world and counseling world. She's incredible, and I got to, talk to her as I was writing the book because it's kind of all my work is rooted in the nervous system, polyvagal theory. And anyway, I was talking to her, and she was saying, I was connecting this research to athletes, and she was talking about how a lot of times it looks like they're unwilling or unmotivated, but really they're biologically unable a lot of times. And that's how the nervous system works is that we kind of have these blockades in our nervous systems. I think what I think of right now is like coaches saying, like, look me in the eyes, or like, a player makes a mistake, you yank them, right? They're going to the bench. Their nervous system's obviously super dysregulated. Did they want to make a mistake? No. Did they want to be out of the game? Probably not. So they're probably very frustrated with themselves, kind of with the world in that moment, and they're going through all this. Their nervous system's on edge. They're in fight or flight. And here we are as coaches trying to like stop them from moving and saying, hey, come talk to me, look me in the eyes right now, and let me criticize you some more. And I think that's like, okay, well, if they're already dysregulated, it's only going to dysregulate them more. And then if they're dysregulated, they can't make eye contact or they don't want to, right? It's perceived differently. It's more threatening than like welcoming or connecting. So eye contact in that, state of the nervous system is not beneficial. It's can actually be harmful. So even something like that, to understand really what's going on in their world, and give them what they need in those moments to get to a place where we can really, connect, I think is beneficial.
Yeah, David, and I mean, I've been looking forward to this because I think there's so many just overlap similarities in our background, both basketball, in our background, psychology. I never did a doctoral program, but working with kids and then helping coaches be more effective with working with Gen Z athletes. I absolutely agree. Awareness is foundational. And so I love that you champion a questions based approach, one, to help generate greater awareness on the part of the athlete, but also to show the quality of care on the part of the coach. I do hear that a lot. Coaches like, oh, kids these days are lazy, right? And what I find fascinating about your work is the differentiation for the purpose of understanding about different states. How do you reply to coaches that say, "Okay, yeah, David, I get it. Like they're not unwilling, they're unable." But how do you increase ability with kids
Right.
who maybe have had fewer reps practicing emotional regulation because they're not playing outside, they're interfacing with screens. So how do you help athletes develop or get those reps in to increase their ability to do something that might be an expectation from a coach?
Right. No, that's a great question. And I think, again, to come back to the awareness of where are they starting is usually the question I'm asking as like a coach or helping other coaches. Like, where is this athlete starting the practice or the game or the session or the meeting? Where are they right now? What mode is their nervous system? Are they dysregulated? Are they regulated? And we can talk about maybe what to look for and how to identify that. But knowing where they're beginning is the biggest approach because one, that's going to impact, yeah, how we perceive them and what we're thinking as coaches, which influences our feelings and behaviors. But and then also, it impacts, we can intervene more precisely and a little bit more accurately there otherwise, just based, off assumptions. And so I think that awareness of where are they beginning, and then it becomes the tools, right? And so the book that I wrote and a lot of my approach is bet method. So bet was, a fun thing. It's still kind of trendy, but right, the kids were saying it. I don't know if y'all interacted with kids. I would say it right. They'd be like,
Gen
"Oh,
Z
you going to practice?"
slang, bet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, bet. Right, you going to practice later? Yeah, bet. And so that's what I did. Breath, eyes, and touch. That's what it stands for. Breath, eyes, and touch. And so those three primary pathways to access our nervous system and influence it, influence the mode, and help us get into this mode of connection mode where we're connected with ourselves and others, and essentially can really work together with our coaches to, do what we're all striving to do together. And so when we're talking about practicals, awareness, understanding what mode they're in would be one, and then two, stepping in, because a lot of times it isn't more technical talk or tactical talk. So if you're struggling right with this guard and handling, pressure on the ball, right, maybe it's not talking about footwork or how to create space or a pullback dribble or an in and out and then go into over here and then pass the ball. Maybe it's just helping them get to a place where they can just handle, the pressure, the stress, where they can just handle even learning or listening. So what I mean by that is even breathing and using, helping them use their eyes and interacting with them through touch and getting teammates involved to show that encouragement. I know that's a big part of the kind of culture building, of y'all's work and everything. So I think those are kind of, if you want me to go into specifics, I can talk about maybe like very practical tools within each three of those if y'all want to.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that, and I'm hearing so many coaches who've asked me the same question. Okay, this is great for individuals, but I
Hmm.
coach a team. So
Yeah.
if I have a team meeting or if I'm seeing my team before the game, we're in the locker room, and I notice because of an awareness of your work that I have athletes in various states. What do I do then?
Yeah, that's a great point. So a couple things there with the team, and then maybe we can go individual because there's a lot of tools that overlap there. So with the team, yes, people have different nervous systems in the sense that we're all individuals, we're all wired, a little bit differently, but there are biological principles that all of our bodies and brains like follow. So even something as simple as if you extend your exhale longer than your inhale, you're calming your body and brain down. You're activating parasympathetic, which is like the brake pedal of the nervous system. And if you inhale longer than you exhale, then you're activating the gas pedal of the nervous system, the sympathetic, which is kind of fight or flight energized. So a lot of times people might be dysregulated, their attention, they're scatterbrained, they're looking all over the place, they're kind of jittery, their muscles are tight, shoulders are high, the breathing quick. You want to hit the brake pedal. So even before a game or halftime or, down regulating after practice, when you're about to kind of talk to them and, they're not really listening, being able to do some breathing. So even something as simple as a 3-second inhale and a 6-second exhale would be hitting that brake pedal. So even just doing that for like a couple rounds before a game, just to calm the jitters or calm the nerves, things like that, just to get our brains and our bodies in a place where it's more balanced in between kind of the gas and the brake pedal. And so, that's something you can do as a team. Another thing practically of like if I'm noticing as a coach, okay, this person's a little bit out of it, or I know they're stressed and they've got this going on, I might pull a separate teammate that I know that they're close with, or someone that positionally they're like very close, like it's in soccer, maybe the best defenders, or volleyball, both in the back row, or both guards in basketball, or big men. And so I think even pulling a teammate aside that they connect with or have a relationship with, just to let them in on that. Just like, hey, I'm noticing that they might be a bit on edge, or like this game might mean a lot to them. They really want to win, or they really want this. Like, what are some things that you can do that would support your teammate? Like, what are some ways that you can show encouragement that would help them be more connected and perform how they want to perform? Because then again, you're expanding their IQ, not IQ just of the game, but socially, and helping the teammates. You're fostering some team cohesion there, but you're not going to that player directly. You're kind of doing it indirectly through other players, so that way they can self-organize better on the court or the field without you intervening.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. The most important team that I lead is my family right now, I feel like. And there's these moments where I feel like at least three-quarters of us are dysregulated. It's probably usually my fault, if I'm honest. But anyways, we have these moments and we just call it a family reset. And we all say, all right, we're going to just all take deep breaths here. And this is mostly them just all just going along just to help me reset.
Mhm.
But either way, we do the family reset and we go back to the breath. I love that bit. The
Mhm.
thing that one of the things you talk about that I'm really curious on is the eyes. And I know you talk a lot about single point focus. You mentioned in the book of like, and I've done some of that with teams or athletes. Say, let's focus on, one point, one focus, the ball, whatever, that type of thing. But I was curious, exteroception, maybe just broadening your vision, because a lot of times we get very narrow vision. I know that some of the research out there around like exteroception, like let's just step back, let's just take in a
Mhm.
broad view of everything and just take in all the things going on there. That can be sometimes helpful. I didn't know if you could speak to just moves that you could do with your team. Absolutely 100%. I love breath work with teams, halftime, let's do 60 seconds breath before we have a conversation. So impactful,
Mhm.
so easy. Everyone loves it once you start doing it. But what are some things you could do around the eyes and the touch?
Yeah, it's a great question. With the eyes, it's important for athletes to be able to control their vision, and understanding that stress impacts our vision, so it constricts it, and we kind of get that tunnel vision a lot of times. So as athletes, the tunnel vision can be good. It can be really good to focus on one specific point and just have that laser focus. That's great. What's not good is when we get locked into that, when we can't expand our focus, because even thinking basketball, we have to see broadly as you're bringing the ball up the court and understand positions and team, you're right, in locations of players and the spacing, and it's all going to be changing. But and then also as you're like driving, you have to cue into like specific points of specific spots and cue into right? A defender's kind of hips and how they're rotating, and all these little things that a lot of athletes and great athletes are picking up on unconsciously. So the vision is important because we need to be able to control it. We need to be able to go really narrow and have some laser focus, and we need to go broad and be able to kind of see the space. And so a lot of times there's athletes get stuck in that narrow vision, the tunnel vision, because of the emotional component too. Whether it's someone trash talking or them getting frustrated at a past mistake or a teammate not giving them the ball, there's this emotional social element where that impacts their vision. It's not even like a behavior on the court by them necessarily, but now their vision is kind of becoming really narrow and constricted. So that's when things are kind of getting hot on the court or on the field, when players are, maybe getting frustrated or angry. I think a lot of times you start to see those signs and symptoms of the vision constricting. They get tunnel vision, they're not seeing the space on the court or field, and then that's a great time to expand the vision. So just like using breath to help regulate and calm our body and brain, the eyes, we can do that too, even by, everyone listening right now can do it, of just like focusing on one point and ahead of you, right on a wall or whatever you're looking at. And as you're focusing on that one point, just notice the periphery of your vision. So you're going to notice the sides, the left side and the right side. So you're going to keep your eyes focused on that one point, but you're just going to notice the sides as far as you can of your vision. And then you're also going to notice the top, the tippy top of your vision as you're focusing on that one spot, and then the absolute bottom of your vision as you're focused on that one spot. So as you do this, you're keeping your vision on one spot, but you're noticing the peripheral vision. What we know when athletes get dysregulated, they lose that peripheral vision. They start to just lock in, which isn't not necessarily a bad thing, but what is a bad thing is when we don't have control over our vision. So even helping that, now we're activating that brake pedal of our nervous system, we're regaining control of our vision, so we can kind of combine that focus on one particular point with a broader vision, and use both however we need to. So I think even just that little exercise, doing that in timeouts, doing that at substitutions, and even just players like soccer, right? There's like a dead ball or a goal kick or something where you have just a little bit of space. That's a great time to be able to just kind of activate your vision, widen the scope, and then focus on what's important in that particular moment.
Yeah, I know I've seen the Irish rugby team, which, and people that don't watch rugby is as fast paced, just up and back moving, but they'll have times where there's a quick stop and play. They come together. They would, I think, hit all three of those things. They lock arms,
Hmm.
their eyes are open, they're really taking in the surroundings, each other, and then they're taking a one breath. It's just one big breath in and out. And I think it's just called like their one breath routine. But um, I love this aspect of, trying to incorporate team rituals, because I think it speaks to the power of regulation and how we can help others to regulate, um, by how we show up in that space, and that this isn't just all on like the one individual. Am I right in that?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing, is understanding like the environment, right? Because our nervous system, we don't just self-regulate, we co-regulate. And so right now in this conversation, like my nervous system, even though we're far apart, we're doing this virtually, my nervous system is still impacting yours, and your nervous system is impacting mine. And so our nervous systems regulate socially. So as coaches, we can cultivate environments and cultures that breed regulation. Then even indirectly you're impacting and benefiting these athletes and creating those rituals for regulation, like you're saying. And so the social piece is interesting. That kind of leads into touch. And Betsy, I think you'll really like this with basketball, because they did the study last year in 2024 looking for a correlation between with NCAA women's, so college basketball, looking for a correlation between touch and between free throws. So looking at performance of free throw shooting, and what they found was that touch predicted the performance of free throw shooting after the first free throw was missed. So meaning the teammates that had the teammate touch after they missed the first free throw were more likely to make the second one than people who didn't have that physical touch. And I love that. And that's simple,
That's
and,
cool.
and it's kind of common sense, right? It's like, okay, that's why that ritual and practice is there, but it's nice to have data to support it. And it speaks to the reality that, like, what is that gesture? That gesture means like, hey, you belong, you got this, I'm with you, right? Touching of the hands, we're such physical social creatures, is that we need that. We need that. That's one of our deepest needs, if not our deepest, is that sense of belonging. And so touch really, gets into that and the social element. So I love that, even practically. of not just going through the motions, but really intentionally touch. And another study to highlight would be the difference between kind of a low high five and a high five. Seeing that, and this was in athletes too, seeing that their cortisol levels, so the kind of stress hormone, decrease, but only for the high five, not for the low one. And it's really interesting. And when I'm giving kind of workshops or talks, I have people do it to whoever's next to them. So if you're listening to this, right, maybe do it to the person who's next to you in the car, or maybe your dog or what have you. But like the low high five, it just kind of almost feels like, yeah, just kind of commonplace going through the motions. But the high five has some visibility to it of like, hey, I'm with you, right? There's something that kind of gets a little bit more of a rise there of like, oh, it kind of just, it's a little bit happier. And so I just love this reality that, man, we can't get away from this touch aspects from, when you're stressed as an athlete or discouraged or facing failure, all these things. It is so important to have people around you communicating to you that we're here for you, we're with you, we got this, we're together. And I think that speaks to the social element of our nervous system, and the role that coaches and teammates play in the sports space.
Yeah, I hear David often coaches talk about the volatility of emotions of their athletes,
Hmm.
sometimes without the self-reflection that their own emotional volatility or inability to self-regulate is absolutely contributing when you talk about that co-regulation. What resources would you direct coaches to specifically if if they want to learn more about what regulation looks like for themselves, or how to create that environment that you talked about where consistently co-regulation is happening in a way that supports the individual's ability to better self-regulate whenever it's needed?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I hear you on that. Like coaching behaviors is huge. Um, Coaching behavior is huge. Even just like just a quick tidbit of like smiling, of even showing that like coaching behaviors of how they smile and different types of smile. It's really cool. I think we're very privileged in a lot of ways to live in 2025, especially just like more research coming out of like what did they really know about coaching and that impacting athletes 30, 40, 50 years ago. But we know so much now, and it's really cool because it's starting to tap into these threads of the coaching behaviors and how that impacts athletes, not just their performance, but their overall just kind of well-being and nervous system state. And so it absolutely is huge for coaches to understand how to regulate their own emotions, their own thoughts, and their own behaviors. And so I would say, as far as resources, and not really in a self-promotional way, but I would love to be a resource in any way. And on my own website, I have, there's some resources there, and a bonus booklet on Bet that's just free to download that talks about communication and talk, from coach to athlete and athlete and self-talk. And so there's some resources there. I love like polyvagal. I mentioned that before, and just that's kind of nerd speak for nervous system. And so, Deb Dana had already mentioned her. She's great of understanding the nervous system and understanding how to regulate, especially socially. So even just practically, she has many books that are just exercises on how to regulate your own nervous system, and just very digestible, very easy, very simple. So that would be a great resource to highlight her work, Deb Dana. And so I think just understanding it can be very simple, as coaches to, if we even just look at just using the breath and the eyes and the touch, even just understanding how your breath can regulate you as a coach, and then how that impacts your coaching behaviors is huge. So creating some practices, and it doesn't have to be anything huge. You don't need to read 6 books, but just having a couple little tools that work for you to go to. So for myself, I like to do 2 to 3 breaths per minute. That gets me into like a optimal zone of being very focused, and but my mind's very clear, but everything is also very calm. So I've found that to work really well for me. But even just playing around with different inhale exhale ratios can be a good way for a coach to figure out kind of what works for them, and then what leads them to kind of the best headspace to coach others, whether it's breath or eyes or touch. There's a lot of cognitive strategies too. So Ethan Cross is a great author and talks about that with his book Chatter. Then his new book Shift, it's all about self-talk, and then his new book Shift is about emotion regulation, the role of our emotions. So even resources like that are great to understand what's going on in our own mind and bodies and brains, and then also to kind of regulate for better coaching. Those would be a couple places I'd say probably to start. I know that was a roundabout answer, but
No, that I
hopefully that gives a
appreciate it.
little bit of direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I one of the things I Bob, you're just differentiating the difference between a low 5 and a high 5. One thing I try to do with my daughter's team is high 10. Like they always know,
Oh,
like,
nice.
you got to put 10. I want all 10. Like we're all in on this high 5 action or high 10 action. So, all right, folks, that's it for part 1 of our conversation with David. He'll be back next week to talk to us more, give us more tools, more insights on how to work with Gen Z. Now, if you found today's episode, you might find it valuable to check out the coaching notes, not just for a summary of what we discussed, but in the notes, we put together some action plans, some action items for you to consider. How do you get the notes? That's easy. You just gotta subscribe to the weekly culture toolbox. You can do that at tocculture.com. Thanks again for listening. Please be sure to leave us a review and share this episode.